The planet was silent, its red skies hanging heavy with the threat of war. The human soldier, Derek, moved through the dense jungle, each step a careful calculation. The foliage was thick, and the air felt thick with tension, but Derek knew he had a job to do.
Ow!
His mission was clear: rescue the alien queen's daughter, Zara, who had been taken by the enemy. Derek was no stranger to danger. He had been in countless battles, each one testing his skill, his strength, and his will to survive. But this mission was different. It wasn't just about a fight. It was about saving someone who wasn't even human. Zara was an alien, the daughter of Queen Aranya, and Derek's task was to bring her back home. As he moved deeper into the jungle, Derek thought about how he had ended up here. A few weeks ago, he had received a distress signal from the Queen's advisors. Zara had been kidnapped by a rival faction, and they were holding her in a heavily guarded compound. The Queen had asked for a human soldier to rescue her daughter, and Derek was the one chosen for the job. He had never met Zara or the Queen, but he knew that his mission was more than just a military operation. It was personal. The enemy had captured the princess of a peaceful alien race, and if they were allowed to keep her, it could lead to a devastating war. Derek's hand tightened around the weapon at his side. He had to succeed. There was no room for failure. The jungle was full of sound-strange calls from creatures he couldn't see, the rustling of leaves, the occasional distant rumble of thunder. But despite all the noise, Derek remained focused. He had learned long ago to block out distractions. To keep his mind clear, he reached a clearing and crouched behind a large rock. From here, he could see the compound in the distance. The enemy base was surrounded by a tall, electrified fence, and guards patrolled the perimeter. It was heavily fortified, and getting in would be a challenge. Derek studied the base for a moment, then glanced at his wrist communicator. He activated it, and a map of the area appeared in front of him. He traced the path he would need to take. The fence was the biggest obstacle, but Derek had experience with cutting through security systems. He could disable the fence long enough to slip inside undetected. Taking a deep breath, he began moving again, keeping low to the ground and moving from cover to cover. His heart raced, but his training kept him calm. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't let fear control them. As he approached the fence, he paused and surveyed the area. The guards were farther away, talking amongst themselves, unaware of his presence. Derek knew this was his chance. He quickly moved to the fence and crouched down beside it. With a quick motion, he pulled out a small device from his pocket, a cutting tool that could disable electronic locks. Derek connected the tool to the fence's security panel and waited. The device hummed softly, and after a few moments, the fence flickered and shut down. The gate was open. Derek didn't hesitate. He slipped inside the compound and immediately started moving toward the building where he believed Zara was being held. The layout was clear from the map, and he had memorized the location of the guards. He made his way through the compound, using the shadows to stay hidden. The place was eerily quiet, and Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. But he pushed the thought aside. He had a job to do, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Derek reached the building. The entrance was guarded by 2 soldiers, their eyes scanning the area. Derek knew he had to act fast. He pulled out his weapon and aimed carefully. One shot, and the first guard fell to the ground silently. The second guard didn't even have time to react. Derek moved quickly, grabbing the guard's body and dragging it into the shadows. Now that the way was clear, Derek entered the building. The interior was dimly lit, and he moved cautiously down the hallway. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet space. He reached a heavy door at the end of the hall, and without hesitation, he kicked it open. Inside, he found Zara, sitting on a cot in the middle of a small room. She looked up in surprise, her eyes wide with fear. Derek could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else, a quiet strength. "Are you here to rescue me?" Zara's voice was soft, but there was a sense of authority in it. Derek nodded, lowering his weapon. "Yes, I'm here to get you out of here." Zara stood slowly, her legs unsteady as she took a few steps toward him. She was still in her prison clothes and her face was bruised. But there was a fire in her eyes, and Derek could see that she was stronger than she appeared. "You're human?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Yes," Derek replied, offering a small smile. "Human soldier." Zara didn't say anything more, but she nodded, as if understanding. Without another word, she walked toward the door. And Derek followed her, keeping an eye on the hallway. As they moved through the compound, Zara seemed to regain some of her confidence. She moved with purpose, and Derek couldn't help but admire her strength. She had been through a lot, yet she still held herself with dignity. As they reached the exit, Derek activated his communicator again. "Mission accomplished. We're heading out." The voice on the other end responded, "Good work, soldier. Get her to safety?" Derek glanced at Zara, who met his gaze. They were in this together now. The mission was far from over, but the hardest part was behind them. Derek knew that, no matter what happened next, he had made a difference. He had saved a life, and that, he thought, was worth everything. The sound of footsteps echoed in the royal palace as Queen Aranya paced back and forth in her chamber. She had not been able to sit still since the news of her daughter's kidnapping reached her. The weight of her crown, of her responsibilities, seemed to grow heavier each day. But today, it was not the duties of a queen that occupied her mind. It was the fate of her daughter. Zara Arnea had been worried ever since Zara left the safety of the palace to visit a nearby planet. The mission was meant to be a simple diplomatic gesture, a way to foster peace with the neighboring alien species. But things had gone wrong. Zara had been captured, and now Aranya had received only a single piece of news. Her daughter had been taken by a hostile faction that threatened everything Aranya had worked for. She stopped pacing and stood in front of the large window that overlooked her kingdom. The moon was full tonight, casting its soft glow across the peaceful lands below. It was a sight she had always loved, but tonight it felt like a distant dream. How could her kingdom remain safe without Zara? How could she face the people who trusted her when her own daughter was in the hands of their enemies? "Your Majesty," a voice broke through her thoughts. It was Eric's, one of her most trusted advisors. He entered the room, bowing slightly. "We have received word from the human soldier. He has found Zara's location. He is on his way to rescue her." Aranya's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought she had imagined the words. Derek, the human soldier who had volunteered for the dangerous mission, it was the only one she could rely on now, the only one who had the strength to get Zara back. "Is it true? He is coming?" Aranya's voice was trembling, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, Your Majesty. He has already breached their defenses. We have no other information yet, but the situation is progressing," Eric's replied. His face was serious, his concern evident. Aranya felt a rush of relief wash over her.
Derek had already
overcome the most difficult part, getting past the enemy's perimeter. But she also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. She had heard rumors of the enemy's power, their ruthless methods. There was no guarantee that Derek would be able to protect Zara. "Prepare the guards," Aranya ordered, turning back to the window. "We will be ready to receive them when they arrive." Eric's hesitated for a moment, and if they do not succeed? If something happens to the human soldier or to Zara? Aranya's gaze darkened as she stared out at the moonlit land. "Then we will prepare for war," she said quietly. The weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Meanwhile, Derek and Zara were making their way through the dense jungle surrounding the enemy compound. Zara had shown herself to be resourceful, and with Derek's guidance, they had made it past most of the traps set by the enemy. The journey back was still dangerous, but the bond between them was slowly growing stronger. As they walked, Zara looked up at Derek, her thoughts filled with questions. She had never met a human before, and everything about him seemed so different. He was tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to understand more than they let on. She had expected him to be like the soldiers of her own world, cold and distant, focused only on the mission. But Derek was different. He spoke to her with kindness, asking about her life, her people, and even joking when she needed to laugh.
"You?"
"No," Zara said as they trudged through the jungle. "I never imagined that I'd be rescued by a human." I thought humans were. Well, not much of a threat. Derek glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. I don't blame you. Most people think of humans as just another species in the galaxy. Nothing special. But I think we have our own strengths. You do? Zara agreed. You've certainly shown me that. I didn't think anyone would come for me. Derek paused for a moment, meeting her gaze. You're important, Zara. No one deserves to be treated like that, no matter who they are. Zara felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had always known she was important to her people, but hearing Derek say it made her feel something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain. They continued walking, the journey slower now as Zara had grown tired. Derek offered her a water bottle, and she took it gratefully. Thank you, she said softly. Don't mention it, Derek replied with a smile. We're in this together now. The path was long, and the dense jungle seemed to stretch on forever. But Derek never let his guard down. He had learned to trust his instincts. Every sense in him told him that danger was never far away. As they moved, Zara began to open up more. She told Derek about her home, her people, and her life as the daughter of Queen Aranya. Zara had always been sheltered, protected by her mother and her advisors. But she had never imagined the true dangers that lay beyond the palace walls. We were always taught to be strong, Zara said, her voice quiet. To be leaders. But now, after everything that's happened, I feel so small, so helpless. You're not helpless, Derek said firmly. You're strong. I can see it in you.
Oh, you've
Been through more than most people ever will, and you're still here. Zara smiled, a small, soft smile that made Derek's heart swell with pride. She was a warrior in her own right. Even if she didn't see it yet, after a long and exhausting trek, the jungle began to thin out, and Derek knew they were getting close to the place where they would meet with Queen Aranya. He couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had kept his promise. He had rescued Zara. But as they emerged into the open field, a feeling of unease washed over him. They weren't safe yet. The journey was far from over. Stay close, Derek warned, his voice low. Zara nodded and walked beside him, ready for whatever might come next. The journey had not been easy, but Derek and Zara had made it through the dense jungle and were now nearing the outskirts of the enemy's compound. Derek knew that this would be the most dangerous part of the mission. He had rescued Zara, but getting her back to safety would be a challenge. The enemy wouldn't give up easily, and he was certain they had set traps along the way. Zara had grown stronger during the journey, but she was still shaken by her time in captivity. Derek could see the fear in her eyes every time they encountered a new obstacle. But he also saw something else, a quiet resolve. She wasn't going to let fear stop her from going home. We're close now, Derek said, his voice low as they approached a hill that would give them a clear view of the compound. Stay low. We need to figure out how to get past their perimeter. Zara nodded, her eyes scanning the area. How do we get through? She asked. Her voice held a note of curiosity, mixed with worry. Derek pulled out a small device from his belt, a high-tech tool, designed to disable security systems. I'll take care of the fence, he said. You just stay close and follow my lead. We can't risk being seen. Zara's gaze softened as she looked at him. I trust you. Derek didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the task ahead. Crouched down, carefully working his way toward the perimeter fence that surrounded the compound. The fence was made of thick metal and electric currents ran through it, making it almost impossible to breach without the right tools. But Derek was well equipped. With steady hands, he attached the device to the fence and began the delicate process of disabling the security system. Zara stayed behind, her eyes fixed on the horizon, alert for any signs of movement. Derek worked quickly, his mind focused on the task. Every second mattered. Finally, the device beeped softly, and the fence flickered before going completely silent. Derek gave a quick nod, signaling Zara to move forward. We're in. They slipped through the gap in the fence, moving quickly and quietly.
Oh,
The compound was large, and the guards were patrolling in shifts.
oh,
Derek knew that they would have to move fast, to avoid being caught. He held up a hand to signal Zara to stay low, and they ducked behind a row of tall crates. They moved cautiously from one, hiding spot to the next, each step measured and silent. Derek had been in countless dangerous situations before, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting to keep Zara safe. And that made all the difference. As they reached the building where Zara had been held, Derek's heart raced. They'd made it this far, but now the real test was ahead. The building was heavily guarded, and the enemies inside would stop at nothing to keep Zara. Derek's grip on his weapon tightened, and he glanced at Zara. "You ready?" he asked. Zara nodded, her face set in determination. "I'm with you." They made their way to the entrance, where 2 guards stood watch. Derek quickly assessed the situation. He needed to take them out silently. He moved into position, his body low to the ground. Zara followed closely behind, her movements just as quiet. Derek waited for the perfect moment. As the guards turned away for a split second, he moved, taking one of them down with a swift strike. The other guard barely had time to react before Zara stepped forward, using her strength to subdue him. She had been trained for combat in her own way. Derek was impressed by her skill. Once the guards were taken care of, Derek and Zara entered the building. The halls were dimly lit, and the air felt cold and heavy with the scent of metal and machinery. They moved carefully, listening for any sounds that might give away their position. Derek could hear footsteps in the distance, guards patrolling the intersections of the building. They had to hurry. They reached the room where Zara had been held, but as they approached the door, they were stopped by a loud voice. "Stop right there." Derek spun around, his weapon raised, only to find that the voice had come from an enemy soldier who had spotted them. Without hesitation, Derek fired, and the soldier crumpled to the ground, silent. "Keep moving," Derek urged, and they quickly entered the room, inside. Zara's heart skipped a beat when she saw the place where she had been imprisoned. Walls were lined with cold metallic surfaces, and the bed where she had slept was nothing more than a simple cot. But it was the memories of her time there that haunted her more than the room itself. Derek moved quickly, checking the room for any signs of danger. "We need to go," he said, his voice urgent. Zara nodded, her mind still racing from the close call. She felt a rush of relief as she realized they were almost free. But she knew the danger wasn't over yet. They had to escape the compound, and that would be no easy task. They made their way back through the building, avoiding guards and staying as quiet as possible. Zara's mind was focused on one thing: returning to her mother. Queen Aranya was waiting for her, and Zara knew that her journey back home was almost complete. But as they neared the exit, a sudden loud noise shattered the silence. A group of guards appeared at the end of the hall, weapons drawn and ready. Derek didn't hesitate. He pulled Zara into a nearby room, slamming the door shut behind them. "We can't let them catch us," Derek said, his voice low but firm. "Stay close." Zara's heart was pounding in her chest, but she trusted Derek completely. She had been through so much, but now, with Derek by her side, she knew they could make it out. They waited, listening to the footsteps growing closer. Derek's eyes scanned the room, looking for an escape route. The door began to creak as the guards tried to break it down. They didn't have much time. "We move on, my signal," Derek whispered. Zara nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was going home. The moment the gates of the compound finally came into view, Derek felt a rush of relief. They had made it through the most dangerous part of the journey, but the real battle was still ahead. He had promised to get Zara back safely to her mother, Queen Aranya, and now they were so close. Zara walked beside him, her pace slow but steady. She had been through so much, but there was a quiet strength in her. Derek admired her for it. The ordeal of her captivity had left its mark on her. But she wasn't the type to show weakness. "It's not far now," Derek said, keeping his voice calm. "We'll be out of here soon." Zara gave him a small smile. "I hope so. I just want to see my mother again." Her words hit Derek harder than he expected. It had been a long time since he had seen his own family, and hearing Zara speak of her mother made him realize just how much he missed his own. But he pushed the thought away. This mission wasn't about him. It was about getting Zara back. To her people, back to safety. As they made their way out of the compound, Zara's eyes scanned the area nervously. Derek noticed her unease and offered a reassuring smile. "We've made it this far. Just stay close to me." Zara nodded, but Derek could see that her thoughts were elsewhere. The fear that had clouded her mind during their escape had not fully disappeared. She was still haunted by the memories of what she had endured. Derek couldn't blame her. No one could. They moved quickly, staying low to avoid being seen. Derek led the way, his eyes constantly searching for danger. There were still enemies in the area, and he had to stay alert. But every step they took brought them closer to safety, and with each passing minute, the tension in the air seemed to lessen. Finally, they reached the edge of the compound, where the surrounding jungle met the open field. Derek stopped and looked. At Zara? "We're almost there. Just one more push." Zara glanced up at him, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "What if we're caught?" Derek gave her a firm, reassuring look. "You won't be. Trust me." Zara hesitated, but then nodded. Derek took her hand, and together they crossed the open field, their footsteps quick and quiet. The jungle ahead promised cover, and once they reached it, they would be safe. But just as they reached the edge of the field, a loud shout echoed from behind them. Derek spun around, instinctively pulling Zara behind him. "They've spotted us," he said urgently. "Run." Without a second thought, Zara followed him as they sprinted into the jungle. The sounds of the enemy soldiers chasing after them grew louder, but Derek knew the terrain well. He had trained for moments like this, and he wasn't about to let anything happen to Zara. They weaved through the thick trees and underbrush there, breath coming fast and heavy. Derek could hear the soldiers behind them, but he refused to look back, kept his focus ahead, guiding Zara through the jungle. "Keep up," he urged, glancing over his shoulder for a brief moment. "We're almost there." Zara's feet were getting tired, but she pushed forward, determination in her eyes. She wouldn't let the enemy take her back, not now, not when freedom was so close. Derek heard the sound of branches snapping and knew they were getting closer to their pursuers. They had to act fast. "Up ahead," he said, pointing to a narrow path through the trees. "We'll use that to lose them." Zara nodded, and they changed direction, ducking under low-hanging branches as they sped down the new path. The jungle grew thicker, sounds of pursuit becoming muffled by the dense foliage around them. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as they pushed on. He could feel the weight of the situation, the pressure of keeping Zara safe, but he didn't let it slow him down. They had been through so much already, he couldn't let it end now, after what felt like an eternity. They reached a small clearing where the path opened up to a wider area. Derek slowed, looking around. They were close to the point where they would meet the Queen's soldiers. If they could just make it to that position, they would be safe. But before they could take another step, the sound of footsteps reached them again. The enemy was closing in, and this time they wouldn't be able to outrun them. Derek made a quick decision. Hide now. Without question, Zara crouched down, hiding behind a large rock. Derek followed her, pulling out his weapon as he prepared. To defend them both, he heard the voices of the soldiers approaching, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Derek's heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady. They couldn't afford to be discovered. Not now. The soldiers came into view, their eyes scanning the area. Derek's grip tightened on his weapon, ready to act if they were spotted, but he had to stay patient. One wrong move, and everything would be lost. The soldiers passed by, their attention focused on the other side of the clearing. Derek held his breath, willing the moment to pass. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the soldiers disappeared into the jungle, unaware of their presence. Derek let out a quiet breath of relief and turned to Zara. "We're clear. Let's go." Zara looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Derek nodded. "We're not done yet, but we're almost there." They continued on, making their way through the last stretch of the jungle. The sounds of the enemy soldiers faded into the distance. Derek allowed himself a brief moment of hope. Soon they would reach Queen Aranya, and Zara would be safe. The journey was almost over, but Derek knew that the bonds formed on this journey would last forever. The jungle was still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Derek and Zara could hear nothing but the sounds of their own footsteps. The danger was behind them, and ahead of them lay the safety of Queen Aranya's palace. They had made it through the hardest part, but there was still a long road ahead. Zara walked beside Derek, exhaustion written on her face. She had been through so much, but there was a quiet strength in her that Derek admired. She had been a prisoner, but she had never given up. Even in the darkest moments, she had found the courage to keep going. Derek couldn't help but think about how different their journey had been from what he had imagined. When he had first received the mission, it had seemed so simple. Go in, get the princess, and get out. But the reality had been much more complicated. It hadn't been just about rescuing Zariat. It had been about keeping her safe, about forming a bond that would carry them through the dangers they faced. I never thought it would be like this, Zara said, breaking the silence. I thought I would be taken back to my mother and everything would be fine. But now, I don't know if I even recognize the world I'm going back to. Derek glanced at her, his expression softening. You're not alone, Zara. You have people who care about you. When we get back, things will be different. You'll see. Zara gave him a small smile, but Derek could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was trying to believe him, trying to trust that things would get better. But the weight of her experiences was heavy on her heart. They walked for a while longer, the quiet jungle stretching out around them. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. It was peaceful, but the world they were returning to was anything but. As they neared the edge of the jungle, Derek's communicator beeped softly. He pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen. It was a message from the Queen's advisors. We're close, Derek said, showing the message to Zara. The Queen is waiting for you. Zara's face lit up at the news. She quickened her pace, her steps more confident now. Derek followed closely behind, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. They couldn't let their guard down just yet. Soon they reached the palace gates. Derek's heart beat faster as they approached. This was it. They had made it. Zara would finally be reunited with her mother. Their mission would be over. The gates opened, and they were greeted by the Queen's soldiers, who stood at attention. Derek could see the relief in their eyes as they recognized Zara. They had been waiting for her return, and now, finally, she was home. Zara stepped forward, her legs unsteady at first, but she quickly regained her strength. She looked up at the palace, her heart full of mixed emotions. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed so distant, so foreign. Everything had changed during her time away. Derek stepped beside her, his voice low. You're safe. Now. Zara nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the palace. I don't know if I'll ever feel the same again. Before Derek could respond, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, Queen Aranya. Her eyes locked onto Zara, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, the Queen descended the stairs, her arms outstretched. Zara, the Queen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached her daughter and enveloped her in a warm embrace, holding her tightly. Zara's eyes filled with tears, and she held on to her mother, not wanting to let go. I'm so sorry, my child, Queen Aranya murmured, stroking Zara's hair. I should have been there for you. I never should have let this happen. Zara pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting her mother's. You didn't know? You couldn't have known. Queen Aranya's gaze softened, and she nodded. I know, but it doesn't make it any easier. Derek stood at a distance, allowing mother and daughter their moment. He could feel the weight of the reunion, the emotion in the air. It was a reminder of what he had been fighting for. This wasn't just about a mission, it was about families, about bonds that went beyond duty. After a long moment, Queen Aranya turned to Derek. Thank you, she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. You have done what no one else could. You have brought my daughter back to me. Derek gave a small nod. It was my honor, Your Majesty. Queen Aranya looked at Zara and then back at Derek. You risked everything for her. For us, I will. Never forget what you've done. Zara stepped forward, her hand gently resting on Derek's arm. Thank you, Derek. I don't think I could have made it without you. Derek smiled at her, a warm, reassuring smile. You're stronger than you think. The queen nodded in agreement. You are strong, Zara. You've been through more than most could ever endure, and yet you're here. You're home. Air felt different now, lighter somehow. The queen's words seemed to lift a weight from Zara's shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax. As the evening passed, the palace settled into a quiet peace. Derek was invited to stay, but he knew that his mission was complete. He had done what he set out to do. He had brought Zara home. He didn't belong in the palace. His duty was to return to his own people, to continue serving them as he always had. Zara walked with him to the gates as he prepared to leave. You're leaving? She asked, her voice quieter now. Derek nodded. I've done what I came here to do. You're safe now, and that's all that matters. Zara smiled softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. You will always have a place here, Derek. If you ever need anything. Derek smiled back. Thank you. But for now, I think it's time for me to go home. With that, he turned and left the palace grounds, his heart a little lighter than when he had arrived. The mission had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. Zara was home, and Queen Aranya had her daughter back. The galaxy felt a little brighter, a little safer because of what they had done. The morning sun rose slowly over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the land. The air was cool, and the sounds of the palace grounds came alive as birds sang and the servants began their work. But for Zara, the world felt different. Today, it had been several days since her return, and while the palace was familiar, she still felt like a stranger in her own home. Zara sat by the window in her room, gazing out at the horizon. She had never truly understood how vast the world was until now. Her time in captivity had changed her. It had opened her eyes to the reality of what lay beyond the palace walls. But now, she felt both a sense of comfort and unease. She had been sheltered for most of her life. Her mother, Queen Aranya, had kept her safe in the palace, away from the chaos of the world. But now that Zara had seen the darker side of life, she couldn't go back to the way things were before. The past few days had been filled with warm reunions and heartfelt moments. But Zara's mind couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. The sound of soft footsteps behind her brought her back to the present. Zara turned to see her mother entering the room. Queen Aranya's face was soft, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes as she approached her daughter. "How are you feeling today, Zara?" Queen Aranya asked, sitting beside her. Zara sighed and looked out the window again. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I feel ... different. The world outside feels so much bigger than I ever thought." The queen nodded, understanding the weight of Zara's words. "I know it's been hard, my dear, but you're safe now. You don't have to carry that burden alone anymore." Zara turned to her mother. "I never thought I'd be the one to leave the palace. I never thought I'd be the one who needed to be saved." Queen Aranya smiled softly and took Zara's hand. "We all need saving at times, Zara, even those who seem the strongest. What matters is that you've come back stronger, braver. You've faced things that most will never understand. Now you're here, with me, and we can start again." Zara's eyes filled with tears. She had never felt so vulnerable, so uncertain about the future. But her mother's words, her love, helped her feel a little more certain about the path ahead. "I don't know what the future holds," Mother Zara whispered, "but I know one thing. I want to help. I want to make sure no one else has to suffer the way I did." The queen's eyes softened with pride. "You already have, Zara. Your courage has inspired so many, and with time, you will find your purpose. I know it." Smiled, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. She knew her journey was far from over, but at least she didn't have to face it alone anymore. Meanwhile, Derek was on his way back to his ship. He had completed the mission that had brought him to the alien world, and now it was time to return home. He had been offered a place in the palace, a position of honor, but he had politely refused. His duty was to his people, to the planet that had raised him. Couldn't stay here forever. As he walked through the palace grounds, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The mission had been difficult, yes, but it had been worth it. Zara was safe, and Queen Aranya had her daughter back. The bond they had formed, the trust between them, would last a lifetime. But as he neared the gates, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had grown attached to Zara, to her strength and determination. They had been through so much together, and while he was glad to see her reunited with her mother, he felt a lingering sense of loss. He stopped at the gates, looking back at the palace. It had been a short time, but it felt like a lifetime. He had given so much of himself to this mission, and now it was over. But Derek knew he couldn't stay. The life he had built was waiting for him back home. Just as he turned to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "Derek." He spun around to see Zara standing at the top of the stairs, her face soft but serious. She had changed since the first time they met, but Derek could still see the strength in her eyes. "Zara," Derek said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought you'd be with your mother." Zara took a few steps toward him. "I was, but there's something I need to say. I can't just let you leave without thanking you." "Without saying goodbye?" Derek smiled, but it was bittersweet. "You don't have to thank me. I did what any soldier would do." Zara shook her head. "No, Derek. You did more than that. You gave me a chance at life, gave me hope when I had none. And for that, I'll always be grateful." She paused, looking at him with a deep sense of understanding. "I'm not sure where my journey will take me next, but I know I want to make a difference. I want to be strong, not just for my people, but for the future. And part of that strength I owe to you." Derek felt a lump form in his throat, but he kept his composure. "You'll be a great leader, Zara, I have no doubt." Zara smiled, but it was a sad smile. "You were always the one to believe in me. I'll never forget that." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them understanding the weight of the moment. Then Zara stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "Take care, Derek. I hope our paths cross again one day." Derek looked down at their joined hands and then back at her. "I do too." With one final smile, Zara turned and walked back toward the palace. Derek watched her go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their paths had crossed for a reason. Their journey together had come to an end, but the memory of it would stay with him forever. He took a deep breath, turned, and walked toward his ship. There was still much work to be done, many battles to fight. But for now, he had done what he set out to do. Zara was home, and that was enough.